Get ready to brave some serious cold because today we're heading to the bottom of the world, the Antarctic, for another deep dive.
Brr, and you're talking about some seriously frigid history, too.
Absolutely. You shared some excerpts from Terra Nova, Ambition, Jealousy, and Simmering Rivalry in the Heroic Age of Antarctic Exploration.
By Harrison Christian.
Right, Harrison Christian, great book. And we're going deep into Robert Falcon Scott's Terra Nova expedition.
All the ambition, the rivalries, the human drama of it all. There's a lot to unpack.
It's fascinating how this one expedition kind of captures the whole spirit of Antarctic exploration.
You know, before the 20th century, you had guys like Cook, Bellingshausen, even Waddell. They were all focused on, like, charting the continent, right?
Mapping the unknown. Makes sense.
But then the 1900s roll around, and suddenly, bam, it's all about the South Pole. That becomes the prize.
The ultimate goal. Like a land grab, but with ice. I see Sir Clements Markham had a big role in this shift. He sounds like quite the character.
Oh, Markham. He was a piece of work. This fiercely patriotic geographer, completely gung-ho about Britain ruling the South Pole exploration game, and Robert Falcon Scott, in his mind, was his guy to get it done.
The book paints a picture of Scott as kind of an enigma, though. It's like his path to becoming this iconic explorer wasn't exactly straightforward.
That's what makes him so interesting. He wasn't some born leader, you know?
Yeah.
His early life, it's almost the opposite, described as kind of aimless. But the Royal Navy really whipped him into shape.
Instilled that discipline.
Yeah, turned him into this meticulous officer. But, and here's the kicker underneath it all, he struggled with depression. Privately.
Wow. It makes you think about how those internal battles, that struggle, might have influenced his leadership, especially in those extreme conditions.
Absolutely. Did he overcompensate? Was all that meticulous planning a way to mask vulnerability? Did the people around him even know? It adds this whole other layer to his story.
It makes him human, you know. Speaking of which, how did Scott even end up leading that discovery expedition in the first place? That was his first one to the Antarctic, right?
It was a total chance meeting with, you guessed it, Markham. That's how it all started.
So Markham really saw something in him? Some potential? Even Scott maybe didn't see himself?
Seems like it. See, Scott was feeling stifled, stuck in his naval career, family obligations, all that. The discovery expedition, that was his escape, his chance to, make his mark.
And a huge learning experience, from what I gather, like a crash course in the realities of Antarctic exploration.
Oh, absolutely. It was his training ground for everything to come. The sheer scale of the Antarctic, the challenges. It's one thing to romanticize exploration, but the reality, well, it's a harsh teacher.
Speaking of harsh realities, what were some of the big takeaways for Scott from that first expedition, things he'd carry with him to Terra Nova?
Well, he learned pretty quickly that surviving in Antarctica meant learning from the best, specifically Fridtjof Nansen, this Norwegian explorer. Nansen taught him about polar equipment, technique skis, dog sled stuff the British weren't really keen on at the time.
Interesting. So right from the start, he's battling preconceived notions, not just the environment.
Exactly. And of course, it was during the Discovery Expedition where he first met Ernest Shackleton.
Ah, yes, Shackleton. The rivalry, the camaraderie, it all starts there.
It does. But more importantly, I think that's when the Antarctic truly captivated Scott. The vastness, the beauty, the sheer challenge of it all, it got under his skin.
I can see how that would happen. It's almost like an addiction, that pull of the unknown. But as his fascination with the Antarctic grew, so did the stakes.
Oh, definitely. He comes back from Discovery, and suddenly he's this public figure, a hero. And that, of course, puts a target on his back. All of a sudden, you've got this international rivalry heating up nations vying for control of this uncharted land.
Oh, race to the bottom of the world.
You got it. And at the heart of it all is this rivalry between Scott and Shackleton. You can just feel the tension in these sources. It's not just professional, it's personal.
Like when Shackleton decides to use McMurdo Sound for his Nimrod expedition, the same base camp Scott used.
That really got under Scott's skin. It felt like a betrayal, especially after everything they'd been through together.
You can't blame him for feeling that way. So on top of this rivalry, Scott's also navigating a pretty significant personal development. His relationship with Kathleen Bruce, his future wife.
Right, and she wasn't a typical explorer's wife, if there is such a thing. Kathleen was this independent woman, an artist, an intellectual. Their relationship was pretty unconventional for the time.
From what I read, she challenged him intellectually.
Oh, absolutely. She brought out a different side of him. You see it in their letters. A softer, more introspective Scott. But they were also very different people, which inevitably, led to some challenges later on. But it's this fascinating contrast to the whole tough explorer persona.
A different kind of challenge. So we've got rivalry, love, ambition. Quite the backdrop as Scott starts gearing up for Terra Nova. What was different for him this time around? Why go back?
It's a good question. Part of it, I think, was pure scientific curiosity. Scott was a scientist at heart. He saw Terra Nova as a chance to conduct groundbreaking research.
They had a whole team of experts in various fields, right?
Geology, meteorology, you name it. And reaching the South Pole, for Scott, it was symbolic. It would give their scientific discoveries even more weight.
But let's be real, there was also that pressure of the race itself, right? To plant the British flag first.
Oh, absolutely. Scott knew the world was watching. Beating Shackleton and now Amundsen, who'd also entered the race to the South Pole, that would cement his legacy.
Talk about pressure. Speaking of the team, the book does a great job of bringing these individuals to life. They were a real mixed bag of personalities, weren't they?
Oh yeah, you've got Edward Evans, Scott's second in command, a real character, ambitious, boisterous, but his personality would clash with Scott's.
A recipe for disaster, maybe.
Yeah, potentially. And then there's Uncle Bill, Edward Wilson, the expedition's doctor and a close confidant to Scott.
I remember reading about him. A fascinating guy.
Lawrence Oates, too. He was in charge of the ponies. Quiet guy, but he really embodied that whole self-sacrificing spirit.
And you can't forget Bertie Bowers. Strong as an ox, that one. And Trygve Gran. His presence is interesting. A skilled skier, but also Norwegian, right in the thick of this national rivalry.
It just goes to show you, even with all the competition, there was still this element of collaboration in these expeditions.
Pulling together for the sake of exploration makes sense.
Yeah.
But assembling this team, getting the ship ready, all while navigating those personalities, that had to be a huge undertaking, even before they set sail.
Oh, a massive undertaking. And the journey south, that was just the beginning. The camaraderie, the tensions, those treacherous seas, it all played a role in shaping what was to come. And they had no idea what was waiting for them. Just imagine the Terra Nova stuck in this horrendous storm, waves crashing over the deck, the whole ship practically groaning under the pressure.
That's one way to start an expedition. Talk about a trial by ice and fire. The book really drives home how vulnerable they were to the forces of nature. Did that experience, that storm, kind of set the stage for the rest of their journey?
It's hard to imagine it didn't. You know, we think about these explorers and we picture, almost superhuman figures.
Right. Larger than life.
But that storm, it's this stark reminder, that they were anything but invincible. The ship taking on water, the constant fear of sinking, it tested them, pushed them to their limits right from the get-go.
And through it all, they somehow persevered. Says a lot about Scott's leadership, don't you think? And the team he put together.
It's true. The storm, it wasn't just a physical challenge, it revealed their character, you know what I mean? And Scott, in the middle of all that chaos, he stayed calm, composed.
Leading by example.
Exactly. And the crew, they saw that. A leader who wouldn't back down, even when everything was going sideways, gave them something to hold on to.
I bet reaching Antarctica, setting foot on solid ground, that was a huge relief after that storm. But even then, their troubles were far from over, right?
Oh, not even close. Their carefully laid plans, gone. Just like that. They wanted to set up base camp at Cape Crozier.
Closer to the Ross Ice Shelf.
Right, the barrier, as they called it. Better access to wildlife, closer to their route. Made sense on paper. But Mother Nature had other ideas.
As she tends to do.
Tell me about it. The swell was so bad they couldn't even land at Cape Crozier, forced them to find another spot.
And that's how they ended up at Cape Evans.
Exactly. Safer harbor, yeah. But further from their target, just added to the challenge.
Talk about adaptability. So Cape Evans, they're home away from home for 2 years. What was life like there? It wasn't all work and danger, was it?
It was a strange mix. They had this prefabricated hut, cramped quarters, but it was their sanctuary in that frozen wasteland.
Had to be. Stuck with the same people day in, day out.
But that's the thing. That shared purpose, the constant proximity, it created this incredible bond. And within those walls, yeah, they had the scientific work, the maintenance, all that. Yeah. But they also had those uniquely human moments.
The book mentions Ponting's close call with the killer whales. I mean, talk about a reminder that even at base camp, danger was always lurking nearby.
Oh, that's a hair-raising story.
Oh.
Ponting, the expedition photographer, he's filming these orcas, right? And the ice shelf, it just gives way beneath him.
Oh, no.
He barely escapes. Imagine that killer whales circling while you're scrambling for your life.
Shows the ever-present danger, even during those seemingly mundane moments. But through it all, they never lost sight of those scientific goals. They even undertook those incredibly risky winter journeys. pushing themselves and their equipment to the absolute limit.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it? Those journeys, they were brutal. Especially that one with Wilson, Bowers, and Cherry Garrard venturing out in the dead of winter to collect penguin eggs.
I remember reading about that. Talk about dedication. What drove them to do that? It's not like fetching groceries.
It was all about the science. They believed those eggs held clues about evolution, about the very origins of life. And these guys were willing to risk everything for it. We're talking negative 60 degrees Celsius, constant darkness, blizzards that could swallow you whole.
Incredible. What did they learn from that experience besides the fact that penguin eggs are ridiculously hard to collect in winter?
A lot, actually. It was a crash course in survival. They learned their own limits, how to plan for the unexpected, and crucially, it exposed the flaws in their equipment. Some of it just wasn't up to snuff in those conditions.
Hard-won lessons, for sure. Lessons that will be put to the test as they geared up for the main event, the South Pole. Did that experience, that taste of the Antarctic's fury, give them any second thoughts?
Maybe. But their determination, it never wavered. They had a goal to reach the South Pole. Then, just as they're preparing for the final push, a telegram arrives. It's from Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian explorer. Turns out he's also making a play for the pole.
Game on. That must have been a blow to Scott. Years of planning, and suddenly they're in a race. How did he and the team react to this news? Last we left our intrepid explorers, they were setting off on that final push for the South Pole. Knowing what we know about the challenges ahead, the setbacks, the sheer grit they showed, this last part of their journey, it's almost hard to imagine.
It must have been grueling. Every day, the tension ratcheting up, the finish line so close, yet still so far. The sources describe it as this relentless battle against the elements, against exhaustion, against the vastness of the Antarctic itself. They were literally at the bottom of the world.
And to make matters worse, they're finding traces of Amundsen's expedition along the way. Talk about a blow to morale.
It's one thing to know you're in a race, but to actually see evidence of your rival, to stumble upon their campsites, their discarded supplies, it's almost like a psychological torture.
Absolutely. They're giving it their all, pushing themselves to the limit, and yet every discovery is a reminder that they might already be too late.
The book talks about them finding a discarded food tin, ski tracks, even remnants of a dog's meal. Can you imagine?
It's almost heartbreaking. What kept them going? Was there still a sliver of hope, or were they driven by something else entirely at this point?
I think it became about more than just reaching the pole. It became about honoring the sacrifices they'd already made, about proving to themselves and to the world what humans were capable of enduring.
And then, on January 17th, 1912, they reached it. The South Pole. The culmination of years of dreaming, of planning, of pushing themselves beyond their limits.
Only to find the Norwegian flag already planted in the ice.
I can't imagine that moment. The crushing realization that they were, in fact, second. The diaries mention Scott's reaction. It must have been devastating.
His words are incredibly powerful. You sense the disappointment, the weight of what they'd endured, all for what felt like, in that moment, very little.
And yet, even in defeat, they had to turn around and face that long journey back, knowing that winter was closing in, that their supplies were dwindling, that their bodies were already at their breaking point.
It's almost unfathomable. The physical and emotional toll must have been immense. And then tragedy struck. Edgar Evans, he couldn't go on.
He was the first to die, right?
He was. Likely a combination of scurvy, exhaustion, exposure. It was a devastating loss for the team, a stark reminder of just how high the stakes were.
You can only imagine how his death must have weighed on the remaining men. Not only the grief, but also the realization that they might suffer the same fate.
Absolutely. It cast a long shadow over the rest of their journey. And then, of course, there's Lawrence Oates. His story, it's become legend.
Talk about self-sacrifice.
He knew he was slowing them down. The frostbite was severe. He chose to save his team by sacrificing himself.
His last words, "I am just going outside and maybe some time." They're chilling, even now.
It speaks to the kind of bond they shared, forged in hardship and sacrifice. A bond that transcended even death.
Scott, Wilson, and Bowers pressed on, but their fate was sealed just a few miles from one of their supply depots.
A blizzard trapped them in their tent. Too weak to go on, they succumbed to the elements. It's a tragic end, but one that's shrouded in a certain kind of heroism, wouldn't you say?
It's hard to read about it without feeling a profound sense of sadness, of loss, but also respect. They pushed themselves to the very edge of human endurance in the name of science, of exploration, of pushing the boundaries of what we thought possible.
Their story, it's full of contradictions, of triumphs and failures, of meticulous planning and unforeseen disasters. It reminds us that for all our advancements, we are still very much at the mercy of nature.
And that some quests, no matter how meticulously planned, are simply not meant to be. But what they accomplished, what they endured, it's a testament to the indomitable human spirit.
They might not have won the race to the South Pole, but their story continues to inspire, to challenge us to explore, to push beyond the known, even in the face of overwhelming odds.
And sometimes that's more important than reaching the destination itself. Thanks for joining us for this incredible deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.